I am Sarah, 29, and yesterday I returned from the most devastating 3 weeks of my life. After burying my twin sister Emma in rural Montana following a hiking accident, I had one simple request for my family. My flight from Denver lands at Pisage at 5 p.m. today. Can someone pick me up? My brother Marcus replied first. We're all busy. Call an Uber. Mom quickly added, You should have arranged transportation in advance. I typed back, no problem, with shaking hands, but inside I was falling apart. What I didn't know was that within hours, my family would be watching their callousness exposed on live television. Before tragedy rewrote everything I knew about family, Emma and I shared what most people would call an unbreakable bond. We were identical twins, born 4 minutes apart, with Emma arriving first as she reminded me constantly throughout our lives. We did everything together. Same college, same apartment for 2 years after graduation, and eventually bought houses on the same street in Denver. Emma worked as a veterinarian while I pursued graphic design. Every Thursday we had sister dinner. Every Sunday we hiked together, and we talked multiple times daily about everything and nothing. Emma met David 3 years ago at a rock climbing gym. He was patient, kind, and understood that loving Emma meant accepting that she came as part of a package deal with me. When they got engaged last Christmas, Emma asked me to be her maid of honor, but more importantly, she asked me to help plan their dream wedding for this upcoming fall. We spent countless evenings browsing venues, tasting cakes, and discussing every detail from flowers to music. The wedding was going to be perfect. 3 weeks ago, Emma and David decided to take a pre-wedding hiking trip to Glacier National Park. They invited me, but I had a major client presentation that week and couldn't get away. Next time, I promised, Emma as we hugged goodbye at her front door. Next time we'll do the whole park together. She laughed and said she'd bring me back something beautiful from the gift shop. It was the last conversation we ever had. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was in my home office working on logo designs. David's voice was barely recognizable through his sobs. There had been an accident on the Hidden Lake Trail. A section of the path had given way during their descent. Emma fell nearly 40 feet onto jagged rocks below. She was airlifted to a hospital in Kalispell, but her injuries were too severe. She died during emergency surgery without ever regaining consciousness. I booked the first flight I could find. To Montana, a journey that took nearly 8 hours with connections. By the time I arrived, Emma's body had already been transported to the funeral home. David was in a state of complete shock, unable to make basic decisions about arrangements. As Emma's next of kin and closest family member, everything fell to me. The logistics of death in a rural area were overwhelming. The funeral home was small and understaffed. The nearest crematorium was 2 hours away. Emma had never discussed her preferences for burial versus cremation, leaving me to make impossible choices while drowning in my own grief. David tried to help, but he was barely functional, spending most of his time staring blankly at walls or breaking down in uncontrollable sobs. During this nightmare, I called my family daily, desperate for emotional support and guidance. These conversations were frustratingly brief. My mother, Linda, would ask about practical matters like costs and timeline, then explain why she needed to end the call. My father, Robert, offered generic condolences before changing the subject to his work stress. My brother, Marcus, barely engaged at all, claiming he was in the middle of important projects at his law firm. When I asked if anyone could come to Montana to help with arrangements, the responses were predictably disappointing. Mom said the flights were too expensive on short notice, and Dad had a crucial business trip. Marcus claimed he couldn't get away from court dates. I was effectively handling my twin sister's death alone, while the people who raised us both offered nothing but distant sympathy. Emma's funeral was small and heartbreaking. David's family flew in from Seattle. A few of Emma's veterinary colleagues made the drive. But my own family was represented by a flower arrangement and their absence. I stood at the podium delivering Emma's eulogy to a room of practical strangers, sharing memories of our childhood, our dreams, our unfinished plans. The wedding we would never plan together. The children she would never have. The growing old together we had always assumed would happen. After the service, I spent another week in Montana helping David sort through Emma's belongings and dealing with insurance claims. The financial burden was staggering. Emma's medical, Bills from her brief hospital stay exceeded $60,000. The helicopter evacuation alone cost $18,000. Her life insurance policy would eventually cover some expenses, but the immediate costs fell to me as her closest family member. I maxed out my credit cards and depleted my savings account to cover funeral expenses, outstanding medical bills, and the costs of shipping Emma's possessions back to Denver. Throughout this process, I continued updating my family on the situation, hoping someone might offer financial assistance or at least acknowledge the magnitude of what I was handling alone. Instead, I received advice about being more budget conscious and suggestions to let the insurance companies handle everything. When I explained that insurance doesn't pay up front and bills were due immediately, my father lectured me about the importance of emergency funds. My mother wondered aloud why I was taking on so much responsibility when David should be handling his fiancée's affairs. Looking back, I should have recognized the pattern. This was exactly how my family had always functioned. When I graduated valedictorian from high school, my parents attended the ceremony but left immediately afterward to get Marcus to his baseball championship game. At my college graduation, they arrived late and spent the reception networking with other parents for Marcus's law school applications. Even at my art exhibition last year, they stayed for 20 minutes before leaving for Marcus's dinner party. Emma and I had often discussed our family's obvious favoritism toward Marcus. As the only son and youngest child, he had always been the center of their attention. His achievements were celebrated while ours were acknowledged briefly before conversation shifted to his needs, his goals, his future. We had learned to rely on each other rather than expect equal treatment from our parents. Now, with Emma gone, I was facing this dynamic alone for the first time. The realization was crushing. My twin sister was dead. I had handled every aspect of her death alone, and my family's primary concern seemed to be avoiding inconvenience or expense. The flight home from Montana was delayed 3 hours due to weather. I sat in the Denver airport exhausted beyond description, scrolling through photos of Emma on my phone. Pictures of us at her veterinary graduation, hiking together last summer, laughing over dinner just weeks ago. The world felt impossibly empty without her constant presence. During the delay, I texted the family group chat with my updated arrival information. My flight from Denver lands at 5 p.m. today. Can someone pick me up? I thought surely, after everything that had happened, someone would offer this basic support. After 3 weeks of handling my sister's death alone, a simple airport ride seemed like the least they could do. Marcus's response came within minutes. "We're all busy. Call an Uber." Mom followed immediately. "You should have arranged transportation in advance." My father said nothing but later added, "Traffic is heavy on Sundays." I stared at my phone screen in disbelief. My twin sister was dead. I had just spent 3 weeks handling her funeral, her debts, her belongings, and the destruction of all our shared future plans. And my family couldn't be bothered to drive 20 minutes to pick me up at the airport. I typed back, "No problem," because that's what I had always done. Accommodate their convenience, minimize my needs, avoid creating conflict. But inside, something fundamental was breaking. This would be the last time I accepted their indifference as normal. The Uber cost? $43 due to Sunday surge pricing. The driver, an older woman named Carmen, made polite conversation during the drive. When she asked about my trip, I found myself unexpectedly sharing that I had been in Montana for my sister's funeral. Carmen immediately pulled over, turned around, in her seat, and looked at me with genuine compassion. "Mia, I am so sorry," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Losing a sister is like losing part of your soul. Was your family not able to meet you today?" When I explained they were busy, she shook her head sadly. Sometimes the people who should love us most are the ones who understand us least. Her kindness broke something open inside me, and I cried for the first time since leaving Montana. Carmen refused to accept any tip and gave me her personal card. "If you need anything at all, you call me," she said. "Sometimes strangers care more than family, and that's okay. It doesn't reflect on your worth." My house felt different when I walked through the front door. Emma's spare key still hung on my kitchen hook. Her favorite coffee mug sat in my dishwasher from her last visit. The calendar on my refrigerator still showed our planned sister dinner for the Thursday after she died. Everything was exactly as I had left it, but Emma would never fill these spaces again. That evening, I discovered I had missed several important deadlines while handling Emma's affairs. My biggest client had awarded their project to another designer after I failed to respond to emails for a week. Two smaller clients had terminated their contracts due to my absence. The financial implications were staggering, coming on top of the expenses from Montana. I called my family to explain the situation, hoping for understanding or support. My mother's first response was criticism. "You should have maintained better communication with your clients. Death is not an excuse for unprofessional behavior." My father wondered why I had taken on so much responsibility in Montana instead of letting David handle everything. Marcus was too busy preparing for a case to engage meaningfully with the conversation. None of them acknowledged that I had just lost my closest relationship, my business stability, and my financial security simultaneously. None expressed concern for my well-being or offered any form of assistance. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes before they each found reasons to hang up. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma falling. I heard David's initial phone call. I remembered the funeral director asking questions I couldn't answer about my sister's wishes. The grief was overwhelming, but equally crushing was the realization that I was completely alone with it. The next morning brought more bad news. My landlord called to inform me that my rent would be increasing by 30% when my lease renewed in 2 months. With my recent client losses and the expenses from Montana, I couldn't afford the new amount. I would need to find a cheaper apartment, but moving required deposits and expenses I no longer had. I reached out to my family one more time, hoping this latest crisis might generate some practical support. My mother suggested I consider moving back home temporarily, but quickly added that they had converted my childhood bedroom into Robert's home office. Marcus said he might be able to lend me money but would need to discuss it with his wife first. My father recommended bankruptcy if my debts became unmanageable. That conversation crystallized something for me. I had spent 29 years accepting minimal effort from my family while giving maximum accommodation to their needs. I had convinced myself their limitations were normal, that family meant making do with whatever scraps of attention and support they offered. But Emma's death had stripped away all pretense. In my darkest hour, when I needed them most, they had demonstrated exactly how little I mattered to them. 2 days later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Carmen, the Uber driver who had shown me more compassion in 20 minutes than my family had in 3 weeks. I asked if she knew anyone who needed a roommate or had information about affordable housing. Within hours, she had connected me with her daughter Maria, who was looking for someone to share her 2-bedroom apartment. Maria was a nurse at Denver General Hospital, recently divorced, and raising 2 young children alone. She needed help with rent and childcare costs. I needed affordable housing and something meaningful to focus on besides my grief. We met for coffee and immediately connected. She had also experienced family disappointment during her divorce, when her parents sided with her ex-husband and blamed her for the marriage's failure. "Sometimes," Maria said, stirring sugar into her coffee, "the family we choose treats us better than the one we were born into. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty or love." Within a week, I had moved into Maria's apartment. The children, ages 6 and 8, were initially shy but quickly warmed up to having another adult around who genuinely wanted to help. I began picking them up from school, helping with homework, and cooking dinner while Maria worked long shifts at the hospital. In return, I had affordable housing and the beginning of a chosen family that actually functioned. Meanwhile, my biological family noticed my change in communication patterns. I stopped initiating calls and responding to their messages became infrequent and brief. When my mother called to ask why I seemed distant, I explained calmly that I was focusing on rebuilding my life and surrounding myself with supportive people. "We've always been supportive," she protested. "Perhaps not in exactly the way you wanted, but families can't drop everything for every crisis." "Emma's death wasn't just any crisis," I replied quietly. "It was the biggest tragedy of my life, and I handled it completely alone while you all prioritized your convenience over my needs. I'm not angry, but I'm no longer pretending that's acceptable." The conversation ended with her defensive insistence that I was being unfair and oversensitive. Marcus called later to echo similar sentiments. My father sent an email suggesting, "I consider therapy to work through my unrealistic expectations of family relationships." Their responses confirmed what I had already come to understand. They were incapable of genuine self-reflection or acknowledgement of their failures. Rather than examining their behavior during my crisis, they preferred to characterize my boundaries as oversensitivity. This pattern would never change because they saw nothing wrong with it. 3 months after Emma's death, I was slowly rebuilding my design business from Maria's apartment. I had learned to work around the children's schedules, often designing late at night after they went to bed. My new clients appreciated my dedication and attention to detail. Word-of-mouth referrals began trickling in. The financial situation was still tight, but manageable with Maria's shared expenses. During this period, I started attending a grief support group at a local community center. The facilitator, Dr. Patricia Wong, specialized in complicated grief involving family dynamics. Many group members struggled with similar issues: inadequate family support during crisis, favoritism among siblings, conditional love based on convenience. Grief has a way of clarifying relationships, Dr. Wong often said. It shows us who people really are when pretense is stripped away. Sometimes that's beautiful, sometimes it's devastating, but it's always truthful. In group sessions, I shared my story about Emma's death, the family's response, and my decision to create distance. Other members nodded with recognition. Several had experienced similar abandonment during medical crises, job losses, or divorce. The validation was healing in ways I hadn't expected. One group member, Janet, had a particularly resonant experience. When her husband died in a car accident, her siblings fought over his life insurance policy, but refused to help with funeral costs or emotional support. "I kept thinking they would step up eventually," she shared, "that surely family bonds would overcome selfishness when it really mattered. It took me 2 years to accept that some people simply don't have the capacity for unconditional love." Through these conversations, I began to understand that my family's behavior wasn't personal failure on my part, but rather a reflection of their own emotional limitations. This realization was simultaneously liberating and heartbreaking. Liberating, because I could stop trying to earn something they couldn't give. Heartbreaking because it meant accepting that the family support I had always craved would never materialize. 6 months after Emma's death, I received unexpected news. Maria had been offered a promotion to nursing supervisor, but it required relocating to Phoenix. She asked if I wanted to move with her and the children, or if I preferred to find other arrangements. The decision was easier than I expected. Maria's family had become my family. Her children called me Aunt Sarah and included me in school projects about their household. We functioned as a unit based on mutual respect and genuine care. I called my parents to inform them of my potential move to Phoenix. My mother's immediate reaction was concern about Christmas plans. "You can't just abandon family traditions," she said. "We've always spent holidays together." "Have we?" I asked. "Last Christmas, you spent 20 minutes with Emma and me before focusing entirely on Marcus's new girlfriend. The year before, you changed dinner time twice to accommodate Marcus's schedule. When exactly have family traditions prioritized Emma? Or me?" My father took the phone and attempted to mediate. "Sarah, we understand you're still processing Emma's death, but moving across the country seems extreme. Maybe we could work on communication as a family." "What would that look like?" I asked genuinely. "Would it mean acknowledging that you failed to support me during the worst experience of my life? Would it involve examining why Marcus's needs always take priority? Would it include genuine apologies and behavior changes?" The silence that followed answered my question. They wanted me to return to previous patterns without addressing underlying issues. They wanted the appearance of family unity without doing the emotional work required for authentic relationships. 2 weeks later, I loaded my belongings into a rental truck and prepared to drive to Phoenix with Maria and the children. On my last morning in Denver, I visited Emma's grave one final time. The headstone was simple granite with her name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved sister, friend, and healer." I had chosen those words carefully, wanting to honor all the roles she played in life. "I'm moving to Phoenix," I told her, arranging fresh sunflowers on the grave. "I found a family, Em. Not the one we were born into, but the one that actually shows up. I think you'd like them. Maria reminds me of you in some ways, fierce and caring and completely authentic. As I drove away from the cemetery, I felt Emma's presence not as supernatural visitation, but as continued influence on my choices. She had always encouraged me to stand up for myself, to recognize my worth, to stop accommodating people who took so advantage of my flexibility. Moving to Phoenix felt like honoring her memory by finally implementing her advice. The drive to Phoenix took 12 hours with stops for the children. During the journey, 8-year-old Sophia asked why I didn't have family in Denver anymore. I explained simply that sometimes families don't know how to take care of each other properly, and it's okay to create new families with people who do. Like how you take care of us and Mom takes care of you? She asked. Exactly like that, I confirmed. Phoenix was a revelation. The desert landscape was entirely different from Colorado's mountains, but I found unexpected beauty in the stark expanses and dramatic sunsets. Maria's new position came with better benefits and higher salary, which improved our shared financial situation. I quickly established a client base among small businesses that appreciated personalized service and competitive pricing. More importantly, I discovered what functional family relationships looked like. Maria and I discussed major decisions together, from children's activities to household budgets. We shared responsibilities based on strengths and availability, rather than gender roles or arbitrary expectations. When one of us had a difficult day, the other stepped up without resentment or keeping score. The children thrived with consistent adult attention and clear boundaries. Their school performance improved. They developed new interests and friendships. They began referring to our apartment as home without qualification, and including me naturally in conversations about our family. This stability allowed my grief over Emma to process more naturally. Instead of being complicated by family, drama, and emotional abandonment, I could focus purely on missing my sister and adjusting to life without her constant presence. I established new rituals to honor her memory, monthly donations to animal shelters in her name, an annual scholarship for veterinary students, and a garden on our apartment balcony filled with her favorite flowers. My biological family's communication became increasingly infrequent. Occasional text messages on holidays, generic birthday wishes, and updates about Marcus's legal career achievements. I responded politely, but without warmth or detailed personal information. They knew I had moved to Phoenix, but nothing about my new life circumstances. This changed dramatically 8 months after my move, when a local Phoenix news station ran a human interest story about my scholarship program for veterinary students. The reporter had learned about the program through Arizona State University, where I had established the Memorial Fund. The story focused on how grief had inspired me to honor Emma's memory through supporting aspiring animal healers. During the EDR interview, I briefly mentioned Emma's death in Montana and my subsequent move to Phoenix to start over. I didn't discuss family dynamics or the circumstances surrounding my relocation. The story was purely about transforming grief into positive action. However, the reporter included background information about Emma's accident and my role in handling arrangements alone. The story aired on a Tuesday evening and was subsequently picked up by other local media outlets due to its inspirational angle. By Thursday, it had been shared on social media platforms and gained wider attention. That's when my parents saw it. My mother called that evening, her voice a mixture of hurt and indignation. "Sarah, we just saw a news story about you and Emma. Why didn't you tell us about the scholarship? And why did the reporter make it sound like you handled everything alone?" "Because I did handle everything alone," I replied calmly. "You were all too busy to come to Montana, remember? Too expensive, too inconvenient, too complicated to rearrange your schedules." "That's not fair," she protested. "We supported you in other ways. We can't be expected to drop everything for every tragedy." Emma wasn't just any tragedy. She was my twin sister, and she died alone on a mountain while you prioritized Marcus's court dates and Dad's business trips. I needed you, and you chose convenience over compassion. Marcus called later that week, ostensibly to congratulate me on the scholarship, but really to express concern about how the family had been portrayed in media coverage. "It makes it sound like we abandoned you," he complained. That's not accurate. At all. How would you describe your response when I asked for airport pickup after burying Emma? I asked. What was accurate about telling me to call an Uber? I was preparing for an important case, he insisted. I couldn't just drop everything on short notice. Your sister had just died, Marcus. Your other sister had just spent 3 weeks handling funeral arrangements alone and asked for one favor. If that doesn't qualify as dropping everything, what would? The conversation ended with him defensive and frustrated, unable to acknowledge that his priorities during my crisis had been objectively inappropriate. Similar calls from my father followed the same pattern: justification, deflection, and wounded indignation that I had dared to publicly exist without crediting their minimal support efforts. What none of them understood was that I hadn't set out to embarrass them publicly. The news story wasn't about family dysfunction, but about healing through service. Their guilt over media coverage revealed their own awareness that their behavior had been inadequate, but they preferred attacking my honesty to examining their actions. A month after the news coverage, I received an unexpected letter from my father. Unlike previous communications, this one contained something approaching self-reflection. I have been thinking about the months after Emma died, he wrote. Your mother and Marcus may never acknowledge this, but I recognize that we failed you during an impossible time. I cannot offer excuses, only a belated recognition that we prioritized our comfort over your desperate need for support. The man you have become in Emma's absence would make her proud. Perhaps someday we might find a way forward, not as we were, but with better understanding of what family should mean. I didn't respond immediately. The letter required careful consideration and discussion with Dr. Wong, who continued providing therapy sessions via video calls from Phoenix. What do you want from a relationship with your father? She asked. Not what might repair their guilty feelings, but what would actually serve your well-being and healing. Eventually, I wrote back expressing willingness for limited contact with clear boundaries. I would consider occasional phone calls or visits when I returned to Colorado, but family gatherings and holiday obligations were indefinitely suspended. Any relationship moving forward would be based on mutual respect and acknowledgement of past failures, not pretending nothing had happened. To his credit, my father accepted these terms without argument. Our first phone conversation was stilted, but civil. The second included actual discussion about my life in Phoenix, and his recognition of how much I had rebuilt after Emma's death. It wasn't the close relationship some daughters enjoy with their fathers, but it was honest in a way our previous dynamic had never been. My mother and Marcus maintained distance, occasionally sending cards or messages but never addressing the fundamental issues that had led to our estrangement. I accepted their choice and invested my emotional energy in relationships that nourished rather than depleted me. A year after moving to Phoenix, I stood in the cemetery where Emma was buried, visiting during a brief trip to Colorado. The Memorial Scholarship had awarded its first full scholarship to a promising veterinary student who had overcome significant financial obstacles. Emma would have loved supporting someone's dream of animal healing. I found my people, Em, I told her grave, arranging desert wildflowers I had brought from Phoenix. Maria's family accepts me completely, just as I am, without conditions or constant proof of worthiness. The kids call me Aunt Sarah and mean it. When I'm sick, someone brings soup without keeping score. When they need help, I provide it gladly because that's what family does. As I drove away from the cemetery toward my childhood home for a brief visit with my father, I reflected on how much had changed since that devastating airport text exchange. Emma's death had revealed truths about my family that were painful, but necessary to understand. Their inability to provide support during my darkest hours wasn't a reflection of my worth, but of their emotional limitations. The greatest gift from this terrible loss was learning that family could be chosen and created, that love could be found in unexpected places, that boundaries weren't walls but healthy filters that allowed the good in while protecting against harm. Most importantly, that my worth was not determined by others' capacity to recognize it. If you've ever felt abandoned when you needed family most, please know you're not alone. Sometimes the people we expect to show up simply cannot due to their own limitations. The challenge is remaining open to unexpected sources of care and connection, even when previous experience makes that openness feel dangerous. What unexpected support have you found during difficult times? Has anyone ever surprised you with kindness when those closest to you couldn't provide what you needed? Share your experiences in the comments below. Remember that your story matters, your boundaries are valid, and chosen family can be just as real as biological family. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.